Hello there. This Sunday, a one-on-one with the Prime Minister. We'll bring you my year-end interview with Mark Carney. And our Sunday Scrum will be here to look back at the biggest political moments in 2025 and what is to come in the year ahead. It all starts now on RBL. Thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday. It has been a remarkable year in Canadian politics, and in particular, perhaps, for Mark Carney. Carney started the year known as a former central banker, having never held political office, and he's ending 2025 as the Prime Minister of Canada. Earlier this week at the National Gallery of Canada, we sat down for a year-end interview discussing some of the issues that matter to you, how Canada is responding to the trade war, a potential pipeline, Mark Carney's leadership, and more. Here now, my conversation with the Prime Minister of Canada. Prime Minister, hello. Thank you for making the time.
Thanks for having me, Rosemary.
You were elected, I think it's fair to say, in part to deal with Donald Trump. But since the election, you have dropped retaliatory tariffs, you've given up the digital services tax, and you apologized for an ad that the Premier of Ontario ran. So I guess Canadians might want to know whether we are any further ahead for doing or not doing any of those things.
Well, we are in a lot better position than we were 9 months ago. The challenge remains that the United States has fundamentally changed its trading relationships with everybody in the world, Canada included. But one of the points I made right from the start when I was running to be leader of the Liberal Party and then running in the general election is we need to control what we can control. We can't necessarily control Donald Trump, I think everyone's figured that out, or the United States of America. What we can control is what we build here at home. You look at the progress we've made, One Canadian Economy Act. Okay, we'll go into this, but it's important to underscore because this is what's going to make the big difference for Canadians.
I get that.
Sorry, may I finish? Which is, so we're made huge progress in terms of building here at home, massive progress on new trade deals and relationships abroad. All of that puts us in a stronger position as a country, more independent, better future, stronger negotiating position with the United States.
And that's the other piece of what you were, that's the other piece that you were elected on. But you were also elected on standing up to Donald Trump and getting a deal with him. And yet, since you've been elected...
And yet we have the best deal of any country in the world,
but that's not what you were elected on. You were elected to get
Was I not elected to get the best deal of any country?
So that's
I would have thought...
So that's it, you're done.
Better is always possible, Rosemary. We can always do better than where we are, and we look to do better. But if you look at where we are relative to other countries, 85% of our trade, as you know, is tariff-free. We have unparalleled access relative to other countries, including Mexico, our partner in CUSMA, to the U.S. market. Now, we're just entering the next phase of these discussions, negotiations. There'll be negotiations in the end around the review of CUSMA, which will start early in the next year.
Okay, so let me ask you what you understand Donald Trump's position on CUSMA to be right now. You had that meeting with him and President Sheinbaum not too long ago.
Yes.
At that point, did he say the deal is dead, I'm ripping it up? What indications did you get?
He did not say any of those things. What we talked about, the two presidents and myself, we talked about the process for reviewing, renegotiating CUSMA. We talked about potential timelines, although we didn't settle on specific timelines for that. The expectation is that it's going to unfold over the course of 2026. If I'm fortunate to be with you this time next year, we'll be talking about that progress. So that's the first thing. The second is I will refer back to what I just said and what I've been saying from day one. Control what we can control, what we can't. We can't necessarily control. The U.S. objectives do move around in these trade discussions, whether it's with the European Union, Japan, China, Canada. They do move around. Our discussions, my discussions with the President Trump, as have been President Sheinbaum's discussion with President Trump, has been there'll be a review and adjustment to CUSMA, USMCA as the Americans call it. Not that there will be any, as you just said,
leaving it entirely.
Leaving it entirely.
The sectoral tariffs that you seem to be close to dealing with, whether it was reducing them or getting rid of them, is that not part of the negotiation?
That will necessarily be part of the negotiation. From our perspective, those are hugely important. And look, the United States needs to make a choice around these, which is, does it recognize, appreciate that the U.S. itself is in a stronger position if there is relatively free movement of automobiles, steel, aluminum, lumber, aerospace across the U.S. border or not. And how it views its competitors. Does it view its competitors as Canada, or does it view its competitors as China? And these are perspectives that the U.S. Takes different views on at different points in time, and the CUSMA discussion, that review discussion, will be part of it. In the meantime, what we are going to continue to do is build this country. That's what Canadians want, and we're going to continue to deepen our trading relationships abroad. Both of those things are good in and of themselves, but both of them put us in a stronger position with the U.S. We are in a stronger position today with the United States than we were at the start of the year.
But only because, and I shouldn't diminish it, not only because, but because of what you're trying to do inside the Canadian economy, not because of anything that you've gotten from Donald Trump.
Well, we did get what we got is in August 1st is the president confirmed that 85% of trade being tariff-free, the best deal of any country with the United States. Having the best deal is pretty good, Rosie. Now, as I said a moment ago, it can be better. It's in, obviously, Canada's interest for it to be better. We will do other things at the same time. We think it's in the U.S. interest as well, but the U.S. will make that choice. It's their decision in terms of how much they want to have an integrated auto industry, which they have had for my entire life. They're taking a different path right now. We'll fight hard to change that opinion, but at the same time, we'll create new opportunities for Canadians.
You seem to get along well with the president. I wonder whether you think that matters, whether that personal relationship that you've developed is helping at all.
I'll refer back to we have the best deal. That's a starting point. I think, look, my view is that the U.S. respects strength. The president respects strength. He respects people. He sees that in you? Well, it's for him to answer. He wants to be a great man like me. That's what he said in public. It's kind of it's a good line. I enjoyed it at least. And you know, so being direct with him and what our objectives are and how we see it, that's important. But also he respects that the UAE wants to invest $70 billion or intends to invest $70 billion in Canada. He respects that we have launched trade negotiations with India, that we're have a rapprochement with China, that we are deepening our defense partnership with Europe, that we are increasing our defense spending, bringing it towards that 5%. Yes, he does respect those steps that we've taken. All of those steps are in Canada's interest. All of those steps are in Canada's interest, but yes, they respect that.
You talked about China there, so that is also part of, I think, your response to what is happening with the United States, as you said, India and China. This past spring, though, you said that China is Canada's biggest security threat. Does that mean that we are taking a risk by aligning ourselves further economically or otherwise because of that, because it is, in your view, our biggest security threat?
Well, a couple of points here. One is never have all your eggs in one basket. We have too many eggs in the American basket. We would like to maintain that relationship and grow others, but we absolutely need to grow others. And that the S is a capital S at the end of others. So it's India, it's China, yes, it's European Union, it's the UK, it's Thailand, it's Philippines, it's in Africa and beyond. It's Mercosur, the group of things, all of which we're working on, first point. The risks, and then the question is how deep is the relationship and how clear are the guardrails around that relationship? And there are areas, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, defense, where clearly the security threats are such that we would not have a deep relationship with China in those areas. We would not have deep relationship with many countries in those areas. There's certain partners, European Union is one, UK is another, where we would. We have a strategic question for our country, how deep those relationships are in those areas with the United States, given our deep integration already with the United States and given the shifting trading relationship.
Coming up, do you like this job?
Do I like this job?
More from my year-end interview with Prime Minister Mark Carney. Stephen Guilbeault resign from your cabinet, and when he did, he was very critical. What it took to get the deal with Alberta. You had to get rid of suspend clean energy regulations. You had to get rid of or not put in place the cap on oil and gas emissions. You had to say we're willing to not use the tanker ban anymore. There are a lot of Canadians that voted for you based on your bona fides on climate change, and then they see you willing to hand all those things over in order to get some sort of energy deal with Alberta. What do you say to them when they say, we're disappointed, this wasn't quite the person we thought he was?
I'm the same person, same values, care about the issue fundamentally, and because I care about the issue fundamentally, I care about what gets done.
Sure.
Not what is put in regulation, not what is said, not what is prohibited, and then nothing happens.
So you didn't think any of those things were going to happen?
The reality is, there is no carbon capture being built in Alberta. There has not been because of these various measures. There isn't large-scale nuclear being built in Alberta. There are no interties between a clean electricity grid in BC and Alberta, which helps breed that. The effective carbon price, sorry, may I finish?
Yes.
The effective carbon price in Alberta is only $20 a ton. So what we did with Alberta is to change all of that with the MOU.
Well, except with all due respect, you said you can have a pipeline if you do the carbon capture storage. You said we're not going to put a cap on oil and gas emissions. You have to do a large industrial emitter, and you already had a federal backstop to use to enforce that. So I'm not really sure what you're getting out of it.
We need the investment now.
Yeah.
What the country, it's not about me, what the country is getting out of it is action. The country is getting investment in clean energy, investment in nuclear, investment in carbon capture. Investment in carbon capture, most people will hear that and of course they think, well, what does that actually mean? It means the equivalent of taking 90% of the cars and trucks off the road in Alberta. These are major investments. Listen, we have too much regulation, not enough action. We're meeting on a day when the results of the previous climate plan are being released. And the fact is we're not going to meet our targets under a climate plan that had all the things in it that you said.
When I spoke to Pierre Poilievre recently, his message to you was that if you want a majority, you have to go back to the Canadian people to get it and not do it, by his words, dirty backroom deals. Are you comfortable getting a majority by people crossing the floor?
Well, we're in a parliament, and when we pass legislation, we need more people voting for it than against it. I mean, that's the way. Last time I checked, that's the way Parliament works.
Right, but that's not what you're doing now. Now you're attracting MPs to the party.
MPs are attracted to what we're doing.
So there's no active recruitment happening?
Premiers are attracted to what we're doing.
I want to go back to what my question was, which was, are you comfortable getting a majority government through people crossing the floor?
I am comfortable commanding the confidence of the House of Commons and getting through the House of Commons, getting support in the House of Commons and votes, and obviously votes and support in the House of Commons for legislation that is going to protect Canadian communities, that's going to build this country, that's going to make our country more independent, more sustainable, more prosperous.
Are there active recruitment of MPs from other parties happening?
I think that there is a spectrum of MPs with varying degrees of recognition of the serious situation the country is in. Mm-hmm. Varying degrees of recognition that we need action, not slogans, that we need cooperation with the provinces, that we need to come together and work together. Then those individuals face their own decisions about how they can best support that agenda. My job as Prime Minister, our job as the government is to put forward our best view of that agenda. Yes, we will compromise in legislation, in committees. You've seen some of that. The border bill, there's compromise on C9, there's other adjustments made in legislation. We will make adjustment for legislation to get through. But yes, if somebody sees that as Mr. D'Entremont and Mr. Ma both saw, that they can support the broad direction of the government and they want to join the governing party, then they have and they will, and they're very much welcome.
As you said, you weren't in this space a year ago, the political arena, not formally anyway. You were considering things. I think that's fair to say. What has surprised you about this job? As someone who has led big organizations and done other things, what is surprising about this role?
I mean, there's I mean, the main thing that jumps out at me is something I knew but hadn't experienced. So in that regard, it's surprising just how real the relentless nature of the job. It's obviously 24/7, 365, and just the span of issues for which you're ultimately responsible in this role. Of course, the way to run big, complex organizations with many responsibilities is you delegate responsibility and.
Are you good at doing that?
I think I am pretty, yeah, I think I am, yes. I think there's, well, it's not for me to judge. There are some people who were here under previous governments, previous situations, they can judge the degree of delegation. What will come with that is that people won't always say the same thing, and that's great. That's fine. That's healthy. You know, that's normal life. People don't all say the same thing at the same
But that
time.
is the challenging part of the job, is it not? That sometimes you have people who are not happy with what you're doing, openly critical of it,
Yeah.
willing to walk away from cabinet, for instance.
Look, would I rather that, if we bring it back to Stephen Guilbeault, for whom I have tremendous respect, would I rather he had stayed in cabinet? Yes. Would I rather he had been there to see what transpires with the Alberta MOU, to see our climate strategy come out, our nature strategy come out early in the new year, both of which will happen? Yes. So he will continue to inform that, but from farther away. But I respect those decisions, and.
But if that was true, if you wanted him to stay in cabinet, why did you go about it the way you did? Because he didn't know the details.
He knew the details.
So what the things that are out there that he has said are not true?
I don't know I don't follow everything he says, but he knew what was in the MOU. And elements of the MOU were changed, consistent with his views.
So once he saw the deal, you asked him for more input and were willing to change them? Because
I did change some parts of it.
But Alberta was not happy with the changes?
No, they accepted the changes.
Okay, so then what is your understanding of what he wasn't happy with?
Well, these are questions for him.
Well, I asked Mr. Guilbeault, but what did he tell you about things then? What were you not able to give him?
We have a different approach.
Yeah.
We have a different approach, and I think what matters for Canadians, what's ultimately going to matter for the planet, for the climate,
Sure.
what's going to matter for affordability for Canadians, what's going to matter for the competitiveness of our businesses, is, are we actually getting emissions down? Are we actually doing large-scale investment in hydroelectric power, in nuclear? Are we actually doing something which was not on the table this time last year, 50 to 60 gigawatts, which is an enormous amount of offshore wind in Nova Scotia that links in and creates whole new industries? That's what we're working on.
Okay, I'm out of time, but I want to ask you, do you like this job?
Do I like this job? Yes. How's that? How's that? Let's end on a high. It's an important time, and it's a privilege to have it. It's a huge responsibility, but as long as I have it, I'm going to be working flat out on it.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Happy holidays.
Thank you, you too. That was my year-end interview with the Prime Minister of Canada. So what does our Sunday Scrum think about what Mark Carney said there? Rob Russo, Stephanie Levitz, Aaron Wary will be here to give us their analysis on that and more. Stay with us. Welcome back. Lots to talk about there from that year-end interview with the Prime Minister, so a perfect time to bring in our Sunday Scrum. Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist, former CBC Parliamentary Bureau Chief. Stephanie Levitz is a senior reporter for the Globe and Mail Parliament Hill Bureau. And Aaron Wary is a senior writer for CBC News. Good to see everybody. We're going to also look back and look forward, but we're going to spend some time talking about what the Prime Minister had to say to me there on various issues. Rob, I'm going to start with you on the trade file. And I guess the idea that the Prime Minister believes that Canada still has the best deal and that a lot of this is now tracking towards the CUSMA review. I don't know whether you learned anything from what he had to say there or whether you thought that is where we're going, that makes sense, his approach to things now.
Well, I think that he would have had trouble acknowledging this, but your question, I think, was based in the reality that the Prime Minister set certain objectives in terms of the relationship, the trading relationship with the United States and with Donald Trump over this past year, and he failed to meet those objectives. He gets a pass from Canadians because they have decided, despite the fact that they engaged Mr. Carney as Prime Minister because of the potential success of dealing with Donald Trump, Canadians have decided that it's impossible for anyone to deal with Mr. Trump's truculence, with his volatility. So he gets a pass there. I think the other reality that's being reflected, though, he said something very interesting that I made note of, and that is we'll be here next year doing an assessment on this, whether or not we've succeeded. I think that reflects the reality that Canadians and Canadian officials are looking at the trajectory, the arc of Mr. Trump's political fortunes, and they're seeing someone in an uncontrolled descent into the earth. And they are counting on that and the midterms working to their advantage between now and the end of next year.
Mm-hmm. And Stephanie, I take Rob's point that Canadians understand that the Prime Minister is dealing with a very difficult, challenging president in a difficult moment. But my point to him, I guess, was the bar you set was the bar that you set for yourself. And it's fine to talk about all the other things that you're doing to help Canada, but the reality is that not much has happened with the United States.
What I found telling Rosemary about your engagement with him there was what I almost saw as a bit of political sleight of hand when he answered, I was elected to get the best deal possible. And look, we already have the best deal possible. I'm not sure that was the pitch, Prime Minister. And I think Canadians weren't thinking about the existing Canada, U.S., Mexico free trade deal. They were thinking about what was coming up. They were thinking about deals on all of the sectoral tariffs. It is factually accurate, of course, that yes, under the existing free trade deal with the United States and Mexico, the vast majority of goods still, come back and forth tariff-free. The problem is that the goods that are such major drivers of our economy, like steel, like auto, like aluminum, like softwood lumber, are still being hit by really punitive tariffs. And to sort of pretend that, I don't know, we'll deal with those later, I'm doing what I said I did. I worry about that messaging for Mr. Carney, and it seems like there's a bit of a pattern there on a lot of his messaging where he's like, no, but I meant the other thing. I'm already doing that. And I don't know that that's, even if he in his own head believes his pitch to voters is the thing he's delivering on, I'm not sure that's how Canadians heard it.
Aaron?
Yeah, I think the challenge in assessing Mr. Carney on this file is that it's hard to know what it would take to get a deal at this point.
Sure.
And it's hard to know what that deal would look like. I do think that the pressure, mounts on him the longer we don't have a resolution to these sectoral tariffs. And I think actually the CUSMA review, adds a layer of complexity and potentially even more political pressure for him in that, Canada's going to be asked to make concessions somewhere. And can we, resist those concessions? If we do make concessions, can Mark Carney, justify them to the Canadian public? I think Rob's right that there is a scenario here where time is on Canada's side, that they can, wait out Donald Trump. But I also think we have to keep in mind that Donald Trump doesn't necessarily adhere to the normal laws of political gravity. And it's hard to know exactly what it will take to get to a deal and what it would look like, for both sides of this.
On the MOU and climate change, I'm going to start with Aaron on this because, frankly, he helped me with some of those questions because that's what we do at the CBC. What did you make of the way he defended that deal? And what I think is increasingly sort of how I'm understanding the way that he operates, which is to say I'm a pragmatist and I just want to I want results. Like I'm results oriented, so that's how I am justifying a deal that caused him to lose a minister.
Yeah, I think he's in somewhat danger of giving short shrift to the climate plan he inherited. It is fair to say that it wasn't on track to meet Canada's more ambitious target for greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030. But I think it's also fair to say that the trajectory at this point looks further off than it was when Mark Carney came to office. I think his argument essentially boils down to, when he talks about results, is that you can look at what he did with Alberta in the MOU and say he has potentially put it in a place where it will be more politically stable going forward. He may have, sacrificed certain policies like the oil and gas emissions cap, but if he can get Alberta on side politically with an industrial price, then that's maybe a more durable policy going forward. That said, beyond that policy, I think there's still a lot of pieces that have to be sort of fleshed out and added to a real climate plan. We're talking about zero emission vehicles and home retrofits and things like that. And so as much as I understand the argument that, the plan he inherited wasn't necessarily, the gold standard or perfect, I think we're still waiting to see whether he can sort of match what he inherited and leave something potentially better.
Stephanie?
It's interesting. Again, I like this point about the political stability of the fight against climate change, because that was such a weak point in the national consensus on this issue, that you had, Justin Trudeau and many in his Liberal government that were going to the mattresses on this stuff, and then you had the business sector and others saying, listen, we want to do something for climate, but this isn't the thing. So maybe moving towards a different consensus on what it's going to take is positive and it's healthy. It's also really difficult and continues to be difficult if we're going to build a new pipeline in this country and the emissions and everything that's going to come from that, how you square that with a perceived commitment to climate change. Right. It is fair at this point. Canadians do not want to hear more about how they need to use paper straws. They do not want to hear more about a consumer price on carbon. Everybody is looking to to industry to do their part, but that's going to take a lot of convincing. Last word to you on that part, Rob.
Well, two conflicting ideas can be true. I think it's absolutely true that even under Mr. Guilbeault, under Mr. Trudeau, we were not going to meet our Paris targets. We were not going to get there. We were falling woefully short repeatedly. It's also true that the game has changed politically. We are in a position now where Canada needs the revenue from increased energy sales, oil sales in particular. This is a Prime Minister who is not in the position of saying no to increased energy sales. We need it, particularly if we're going to have trouble with the United States. I just think that it's part of a long list, a long set of rather astonishing abandonment of stated Liberal dogma over the last 10 years, whether you like that or not. And I'm reminded of something Senator Michael Kirby said, a Liberal senator close to Pierre Trudeau, who said, we're Liberals, we do have principles. If you don't like them, we'll give you some more.
Okay, we're going to take a little break here. We're going to come back with all of you, the Sunday Scrum, and we'll look back at what was dramatic, eventful, I don't know how many other adjectives we can use, 2025 in Canadian politics. You're watching RBI.
to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister.
My fellow citizens, the golden age of America begins right now.
Our CBC News decision desk is ready to make a call. Canada's next government will be a Liberal government.
Who's ready? Who's ready to stand up for Canada with me?
Tonight, I've been informed our party leader that I'll be stepping down as party leader.
Thank you very much to the great people of Battle River Crowfoot.
We will build Canada strong.
You don't negotiate through weakness, you negotiate through strength.
Still no win, still no deal, still no elbows.
Unleash an incredible amount of investment and allow us to work together on important nation-building projects.
So let's give a warm welcome to our newest member of the Liberal Party, Michael Ma, MP for Union Martinville.
Well, those clips tell the story, a dramatic year in Canadian politics. Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum to look back at the year that was. Rob Russo, Canada correspondent for The Economist, former CBC Parliamentary Bureau Chief. Stephanie Levitz is a senior reporter in the Globe and Mail's Parliament Hill Bureau, and Aaron Wary is a senior writer for CBC News. I will say watching those clips also explains some of my new wrinkles that I acquired over the past 12 months, because it was, I mean, all of us have been doing this for some time. It was a pretty dramatic year. Rob, let's start with you. What was the moment, do you think, that sort of unlocked all the change? Was it Donald Trump? Was it Justin Trudeau? Was it Chrystia Freeland? Although that happened last year. But what was the thing that stood out for you in terms of how it set events in motion, I guess?
I don't think anybody had more impact on Canadian politics in 2025 than Donald Trump. He was the one who recast the entire narrative of what the election was going to be about. I don't think that anybody, Mark Carney included, anticipated that the Liberals would be elected to a fourth term. I think in his heart of hearts, if you ask him, he would tell you that a year ago, right now, at the end of December of 2024, he thought at best he might be able to hold Mr. Poilievre to a minority government, and Mr. Poilievre would struggle in the face of the Trump reality, and maybe Liberals could win a subsequent election. So none of that would have happened without Mr. Trump. He turned he didn't just shift the tectonic plates of Canadian politics, he blew them up.
Yeah. And how much of that do you think, Stephanie, was the problem for Pierre Poilievre and him going from, seemingly walking into the office of Prime Minister to not at all that and losing his own riding even?
There were a lot of things going on for Mr. Poilievre that didn't go as planned. And one of the biggest ones was Justin Trudeau stepping down. He had really, in the years prior to Mr. Trudeau's decision to quit, tapped both a vein of anger amongst Canadians about their rising cost of living and the fact that at the time the Trudeau government seemed really tone deaf to it, but also just a very venomous hatred almost for Mr. Trudeau himself. They had branded all of their arguments, and by they I mean the Conservatives, as an anti-Trudeau screed. Remember Justinflation? Remember that tagline that he used to use all the time? And when you take away the villain, what happens to the fairy tale, right? And I think that narrative for Mr. Poilievre was difficult. And I was reflecting the other day about how, in the wake of Mr. Trudeau resigning on that very, very cold day, I looked at that clip and I could just remember the chill, that Mr. Poilievre disappeared for some time after that, right? He really wasn't seen anywhere. You could see, what are we supposed to do? How are we going to recalibrate this narrative? And so you had Trudeau's resignation, and then, of course, you had the Trump factor. And you had, as Rob so succinctly put it, Mr. Trump sort of blowing up the Canadian political narrative. And while I think the election in April ultimately bears it out, the issues that Mr. Poilievre was very strong on, cost of living, crime, everyday boilerplate issues for Canadians, still delivered him 41% of the vote, the best result his party has had in years. And those issues remain resilient today. The problem was those weren't the top line issues. And it was very difficult for Mr. Poilievre to talk about them. His people will say around him, even if we had changed our message, what were we supposed to say every day? And they just weren't sure what to do with that. Whereas Mr. Carney was such a departure, he was so new, he was so different, he could talk about it every day because people wanted to hear what this man, this former Bank of Canada governor, this world person who had so much experience wanted to say.
Do you think, this is not a fair question, I'll say that, Aaron, but I do wonder if there wasn't a Donald Trump, would there be a Prime Minister Carney? And I wonder to what extent, that Mark Carney is fully aware of the advantage that destabilizing force gave him, both in the Liberal leadership campaign and in the election.
I mean, the truth is there probably wouldn't be a Prime Minister Carney. That said, the prize for Mr. Carney is having to deal with Donald Trump and to deal with this world and govern Canada at this moment. Look, it's impossible to look at this year and not say that Donald Trump was the biggest factor on Canadian politics, but I think it's important not to just look at that as sort of a fluke or some kind of passing fad or artificial, external event that just sort of happened to Canada. I think it became a test for the leaders. It became, it changed the way Canadians looked at their leaders. It changed what Canadian voters were looking for, at least a large number of Canadian voters were looking for. And, Mark Carney, at least for this spring, and Pierre Poilievre faced a test, and Mark Carney passed it, and Pierre Poilievre didn't. Now, that may change as the months go on. There's still a lot of voters that are concerned about housing and cost of living and things like that, things that aren't necessarily Donald Trump issues. But, it's hard to get away from the fact that it does seem like the world has changed, and everyone now has to deal with that new world. The Conservatives can sort of look back and say, well, they just got unlucky. But, it's sort of the fact of the world at this moment that we all have to deal with.
One of the things Conservatives also say, beyond we just got unlucky, Rob, is, well, the NDP collapsed, and so what could have, we couldn't have done anything more, which, and we'll talk about this in the next segment about Pierre Poilievre's leadership and the leadership review, but what was that collapse of the NDP surprising to you? Was it as fundamentally important to the way things unfolded, do you think?
Certainly it was critical, but was it a surprise? No, it wasn't. And therein lies the challenge for Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives as currently structured. In a two-party environment, the old saw about addition being far more important than subtraction in politics is very, very important. So where are they going to get their additional votes? When I said that things were blown up, you just look at the electorate. Boomers, seniors, who tended to vote Conservative now vote for the Liberal Party in increasing numbers. Millennials are tending to vote for Conservatives in larger numbers. If you listen to Conservatives, they say that means the future is on our side. Give Mr. Poilievre time, and he will grow that vote. To be determined, but one of the things that we have to look at when we look at what happened to the NDP vote is, again, Mr. Trump scared them into disparate camps. And a lot of those people went to the Liberals. I stood in lines and talked to people at Liberal rallies and was astonished to meet so many New Democrats who said that they couldn't. Again, another change outside of the realm of politics is people feel differently about the country, about Canada, about what they need to do as Canadians, and that's not gone away. I see it in increased recruitment for the Canadian Forces, right through to what they do at the grocery store. So they're going to have to contend with that. Conservatives are going to have to contend with that reality.
And beyond winning and becoming Prime Minister stuff, what has struck you about the way the Prime Minister has approached this job? I mean, this goes back to sort of the interview, but when I asked him if he liked the job, there was a slight delay between the question and the answer, and I wonder what you have taken this year already from how he's governing and what that has meant for the country.
One of the things that's been so interesting, and it harkens back to sort of what we're talking about with the New Democrats to a degree, is that he has a minority government and is acting as though he does not. Which is to say, you don't see a lot of the overt signs of, okay, what's it going to take to get your vote on issue X? How can we help each other? Let's work together. Canadians, and you don't have to go all the way to the NDP's supply and confidence agreement to make that work. But there's definitely been so few signals, although I suppose you could also argue floor crossers, there's a signal, but of him trying to govern collectively. He believes that his idea is the right path and thinks that anyone who doesn't agree with him, well, too bad for them, he's going to do this. I find that really interesting. And the other thing I sort of took away from listening to the interview, Rosemary, was the politics of this all. And I think the jury is still a little bit out. Is Mr. Carney a politician or is he not a politician? Because when you listen to him talk, for example, as he did with you, about his relationship with Mr. Guilbeault and the MOU and how that all sort of went down, he doesn't really, that's not the thing that's giving him energy. That's not the thing that's giving him life, because he's presenting a deal that he thinks is great and he doesn't understand. He offers a little to change. If it's not enough, too bad, you're gone. And I find that interesting. And I find it interesting if, Mr. Carney's personal popularity right now obviously well outpaces that of Mr. Poilievre's, but I wonder if Liberal support comes up to meet that for Mr. Carney. It's enough that everyone likes him, but do people like what he's doing? Do they like him enough that in the next election they're willing to give him a majority?
Okay, well, that's a good place to stop, because after the break, we're going to look ahead. And Aaron, you can start us off that. What might come for Canada in 2026? Who knows? Will it be the same leaders of all these parties? We'll see. You're watching RBL. Stay there. After the whirlwind that was 2025, what could possibly be in store for the year ahead? Trade deals, leadership reviews, pipelines. Let's bring back our Sunday Scrum to talk about what they're watching for in 2026. Rob Russo, Stephanie Levitz, and Aaron Wary. And Aaron, I'm going to start with you. What do you think will be the sort of the big story, the big thing that we should keep an eye on in 2026?
Look, it's hard to not say Trump again. But
and you can say that.
I think that is the backdrop for a lot of things going forward. But I do think, on a more specific point, I do think one of the emerging storylines is going to be national unity. The Alberta MOU negotiations, as much as we talk about it as sort of a done deal, the climate policy negotiations have to be finished by April. The pipeline proposal is supposed to come in, I believe, July 1st.
Yeah.
There may be an Alberta referendum at some point this year. We know there will be a Quebec election at some point this year, which may elect a Parti Québécois government. And we know that, CUSMA negotiations are going to be ongoing and potentially putting pressure on Canada along sectoral and regional lines. I think, one of the arguments in favor of the MOU, I think, is the idea that it helps strengthen national unity, or at least, potentially tamps down a threat to national unity. I think that is going to be a major storyline going forward, and I think it's going to be a major test of Mark Carney's ability to lead.
How about you, Steph? What is the issue or piece that you're going to be watching for?
Yeah, Aaron just sort of almost stole my through line there, because you do have all of these benchmarks in time that are going to add up to something. And I would add, the leadership review for Pierre Poilievre is material as well, right? And the way, I don't think he's not going to survive it, but it sets the stage for something. I'm taken by a tension that's happening in the Conservatives right now. You have Mr. Poilievre, his party's leadership, his party's convention, which a piece of which is the leadership vote. Yeah. And then within days, you're going to have a party in Ottawa honoring the 20th anniversary of the Harper government. And the sort of tension within the Conservative movement there, because there's a lot of folks in Conservative circles who are saying, if Mr. Poilievre fails to win in the next election, that's the end for him. And no one's saying he's going to fail. It's just if he fails, the party splinters and we're back into some interesting political dynamic in this country. And I think when we talk about interesting political dynamics, the New Democrat leadership race is the other piece of this, right? Who does that party ultimately choose? Which path does it want to go on? Does it want to be a much more progressive leftist, let's cannibalize, for lack of a better word, that element of the electorate? Do they try and bridge the gap somewhere between Mr. Poilievre's appeal to blue-collar workers and a classical, maybe a more Justin Trudeau liberal, big national programs, pharma, dental? And what does that mean both for Mr. Carney and for Mr. Poilievre? We'll have some by-elections coming, I would suspect, in the new year. And watching how those votes, either, we always say this, right? By-elections either mean absolutely everything or they mean absolutely nothing. But it is possible that you might see, depending on when those by-elections fall and who chooses to run, some of the signals there about where the electorate is in fact going.
Okay, Rob, anything left there that you want to identify or reiterate as your big issue?
A couple of things. I will start by reiterating there will be significant strains. There have been significant strains on the national fabric. I do think we need to take a moment and realize how remarkable it is to have a Conservative Premier of Alberta and a Liberal Prime Minister in Ottawa, as well as, I would say, a New Democratic Premier in British Columbia, coming off the extremes, coming towards the middle and reaching, it seems, coming towards a consensus on something like a pipeline. I think that bodes well for the future of the country. The Prime Minister needs to deliver next year. He is clearly making an effort, but he needs to deliver on some of this thing. I think he needs to be very, very mindful of the reality that Canadians are feeling in terms of the affordability crisis. It doesn't matter who you vote for or even what your income is. There isn't anybody who doesn't know what the price of beef, of poultry is these days, because it's through the roof. That is a vulnerability for the Prime Minister. I would add one more potential strain on the national fabric. We are, I think, an inflection point when it comes to Indigenous people in Canada. They are having a debate right now over issues such as stewardship of the land versus ownership of resources. That's something that's going to play out next year as well when it comes to Indigenous people and the rest of us in Canada. Something like the Cowichan ruling brings up the issue of property rights versus reconciliation as well. So that's another strain at the national fabric we're going to have to look at.
I'm going to run the risk of asking this question. Is Mark Carney headed towards a potential majority? And if that were to happen, Aaron, what does that change materially for the way this country will unfold over the next 12 months in 2026?
I'm not going to make a prediction, but I will say that if he does get to a majority, it has potentially major impacts. Look, they're one seat away. Getting to 172 makes your life in the House of Commons a lot easier. It makes your life in committees a lot easier. It potentially gets you to 2029 without a new election, giving Mark Carney a full 4 years. And, you have to think that it becomes sort of a psychological, barrier or line being crossed for Conservatives, having to ask themselves, particularly if the number 172 comes from the Conservative side, what does this say about Pierre Poilievre, and do they want Pierre Poilievre to lead them into the next election? It's just one seat, and look, party membership can move around a fair bit in a parliament, but that one more seat, I think, could have, big ripple effects.
Yeah, and to be clear, we don't know as we're recording this anyway that it's going to happen. But one of the things that the PM said was that there are a spectrum of MPs interested in what the government is doing. And I thought, Rob shaking his head there, I thought that was pretty interesting because it doesn't mean that they're all coming from the same place, Rob.
I noted his use of the present tense. There are people on a political spectrum that believe. So in other words, he didn't use the past tense. That suggests that there are more. And people shouldn't underestimate the role the Prime Minister is playing himself in this. I know we have this debate about whether or not he's a politician. If he's not a politician, he's playing political salesman. He is involved in these discussions, whether it's texts or whether it's meetings to close the deal. He's involved in them. That kind of language, that present tense, ensures that Mr. Poilievre and those who support him are going to have a clammy Christmas. They're going to be perspiring over the next few weeks at a minimum, but I would suggest that he needs more than one. A bare majority of 172, lots of things could happen over the next 6 months or a year to reduce that. Yeah. You would think they're going after more than one.
Steph, last minute or so to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're presuming now that the talk of a majority comes through a floor crosser, but what about an election? What if Mr. Poilievre picks up seats in what if Mr. Carney picks up seats in a by-election? And I can give some examples, right? If Jonathan Wilkinson, who's a BC MP, many outlets, including my own, have reported he might have a diplomatic post, would the Liberals win that seat right now? Could they pick up Matt Jenner's seat in Edmonton Riverbend, if Matt Jenner, the Conservative MP who says he's leaving politics? And so it could be a general election. I think nobody has 1,000% ruled out this idea that Canadians go back to the polls in the next calendar year. And so some of perhaps how the country reacts, what this means for the national fabric, is how that majority comes to be. And I would argue there is a distinction between amassing it on the backs of people who choose to switch parties versus going to Canadians and saying, okay, I need a majority. Here are the reasons. Please give me one.
Yeah. Although in the Prime Minister's mind, there is no difference. At least there didn't seem to be in the answer to that question. Rob Russo, Stephanie Levitz, Aaron Wary, thank you for doing this, and thank you for being with us at various points through the whole year. We really appreciate it. Happy holidays to you and your family.
Merry Christmas all.
Thanks, guys. That is it for Rosemary Barton Live for this 2025. It has been a very, very busy year in politics. And my thanks to the team, this team that worked so hard to make this show what it is every week. They are a small but mighty crew. They know who they are. Thank you. And thank you for watching. Wishing you the very best for this holiday season, some time with your family, some time to relax if you can. We'll be back here in 2026. Who knows what we'll bring. Thanks so much for watching.